It's very fun. Awesome, we're live. Welcome to Claudia. Welcome to all of you wonderful people watching. My name's Amanda Quain. I am a bookseller at One More Page Books, which is where you are now, virtually. Also the author of Accomplished, another Austen book coming out in July, which is why I was so excited to talk to the wonderful Claudia Gray about the murder of Mr. Wickham. Welcome, Claudia.
Hey.
Do you mind if before we... She's like, is it time for me to do the virtual event now?
Yeah, basically.
If she wants to make an appointment.
And there she goes.
There it is.
Hold on, everybody. First, we're going to stop my dog.
Perfect.
Come here.
No. It's not a virtual event unless you hear a dog in the background. That's my motto.
Yes.
But to those of you who are watching, hello, welcome. Peaches, you said?
Yes, Peaches. Say hello to, I don't even know how many people, Peaches.
Hello, Peaches.
Okay.
Perfect. Now we're ready.
Yes.
So Claudia Gray, as you all know, is the pseudonym of Amy Vincent. She is the writer of multiple young adult novels, including the Evernight series, the Firebird trilogy, and the Constellation trilogy. In addition, she's written several Star Wars novels. Several is like a gentle understatement, but that's fine.
Six is several.
It's a million severals, most such as, for example, Lost Stars and Bloodline, and she makes her home in New Orleans with her husband and assorted small dogs, one of which we can see here now.
Yeah, sample dog.
Are we going to rotate through dogs over the course of the evening?
No, the other two are probably, dinner is about to get made, and so they are probably very kitchen focused right now.
That's fair. I'm impressed you have one here. If dinner's about to be made, my cat would be nowhere near me at this point.
For some reason, she really loves my office. I don't know quite what it is, but she loves this room for whatever reason.
Maybe she's also a writer and she takes inspiration from it.
Are you a writer, Peaches? I think it would be a very like popcorn and cheese focused work. That would be.
I would read that.
Yes.
That sounds like it could be like the new Dog Man, like popcorn and cheese dog.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We would love that.
Well, Peaches, we will get to your book after we talk about the murder of Mr. Wickham. But first, would you mind giving us like our elevator pitch to describe the book we are discussing today, The Murder of Mr. Wickham?
I described it as a Jane Austen, Agatha Christie mashup. Characters either from or how should we say, derived from all 6 of Jane Austen's novels are brought together at a house party at Donwell Abbey. Mr. Wickham shows up, and like many Christie villains and many Austen rogues, he turns out to have his finger in many different pies, and he's only gotten better and better at manipulation through the years. So it turns out that there are very specific grievances that pretty much everybody present has against him. He winds up dead. The main suspects are, of course, our beloved characters, and the sleuthing has to be done by the 2 people with no motive and no opportunity, who are Jonathan Darcy, the son of Elizabeth and Darcy, who are present, and Juliet Tilney, who is the daughter of the main characters of Northanger Abbey.
Yes, who are not present. And at first I was like, oh, they're missing. But on the other hand, I was like, but there's no way that Catherine Tilney or Henry Tilney could be suspects in a murder.
No.
So it made sense once I sort of thought that through.
And also, I think we learned there is a limit to the number of characters that you can pack into something. It could be a lot and you could still make it work, which we learned from this book's spiritual cousin, Avengers Infinity War.
Yes, very fair.
But there does come a point where it's like, okay, that's going to be pushing it. Yeah. And also, you have the dynamics between the parents and the sleuth, which I think work for Jonathan. But I think if we had to do it twice, that would be a lot. But anyway, you have the couples from 5 of the 6 novels, one of whom have brought along their adult son, one of whom have sent their daughter, and mayhem ensues.
It really does.
Regency mayhem.
Yes. Well, that's the best kind of mayhem, as we all know.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you're a big Austen fan. I'd love to hear more about like your Austen origin story.
I've read the books, or at least I read Pride and Prejudice and Emma, I think, in college, and I liked them. but it was a little early for me to like really seize onto them. And then I'm really dating myself here. 1995 was like the year of
Oh,
amazing adaptations. We got
yeah.
a great Sense and Sensibility, a great Pride and Prejudice, a great Persuasion. And I love those so much that I like went back into the books, and then that sort of got me, you know, into really having the love affair with the novels.
Mm.
And have read them, have watched many, many adaptations. I have the board game Marrying Mr. Darcy,
A great game. I love that game.
great. I have the Emma expansion pack, not the zombie expansion
The
pack.
zombie one is not good. I wouldn't worry about that one.
Yeah. And I keep wanting to figure out a way to play it so that you could mix the Emma and Pride and Prejudice packs.
Ooh.
Miss Bates should get her run at Mr. Darcy, I think, personally.
I like that. I think she deserves it.
Yeah, give it a shot. But I always love these, and there was definitely a period of time. Again, this was a few years ago, because now it's so easy to have a lot of information on your phone all the
Sure.
time. Like the Libby app, I always have like 8 books out or something. But for a while, the only ebooks I had on my phone were the 6 Austen novels. And anytime I was waiting for something, or on the plane taking off, whatever, I would read one. And the minute I got done with one, I went back and found the one I had read least recently and opened that. And I mean, there was about 3 years of that straight.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. So really loved her. I had this idea for a book for years and years. And people around me, I think, were getting a little sick of hearing about it. And finally I was like, is this going to be just one of those ideas you always talk about that never happens? Because every writer has a couple of those.
Sure.
Or are you going to do it? And I sat down and did it. And much to my surprise, it found a home pretty quickly. I really thought it was that I was indulging myself.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like, oh, okay, maybe somebody might want this. But then we ended up finding a really enthusiastic and committed publisher, which has been awesome.
Yeah, I feel like that's the best kind of book, when you put so much of the things you love into it, and then it's like,
Mhm.
actually, people also love this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I should have figured there would be others. I knew there would be some others.
Sure.
But
Just enough others to purchase it are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I have to know more, because I love that you just read the books constantly. Was there a set order that you would read? Like, did you read public, or just like whatever you would happen to read them in the first order first, and then basically looping that?
Yeah, it was sort of a random rotation. I'm also trying to learn Italian. I'm very early in this
Excellent.
quest. Mostly can tell you things about animals eating things. So it's not super handy. But I have this thing. I'm not a paid advertiser, but it's called Prismatext, and you can get. I have a few Austen novels, and in the first chapter, they only drop in the occasional Italian word. Instead of sister, it's sorella, etc. But with every chapter, they start weaving in more and more, because the text,
right?
By heart. You're able to follow it, and it gets more and more cool. Italian as you go, which is.
You said it's called Prismatext?
Prismatext, I believe.
Excellent.
So that's super fun. I've loved it for a long time. I've read a decent amount of Austen fanfic. I've read some continuations. And then, I read Death Comes to Pemberley, which is a good book. But when it came out, I was so hot to read it, because like, they're going to kill Mr. Wickham. I just know it.
Right.
And then they do not kill Mr. Wickham.
And what's the point of a murder if you can't kill Mr. Wickham?
They killed Denny, and I was just like, well, who cares who killed
Denny? That's nothing. You know who remembers Denny? People who play Marrying Mr. Darcy and end up marrying Denny. That's it.
Yeah, I like that.
Even then, I'm hard pressed whenever I play that. I'm like, who is Denny again? And I've read that book a lot.
Yeah. But then finally I was sort of like, okay, and I think this is actually true a lot of times, if there's a creative choice that somebody else has made in their book or TV show or movie, and it digs at you, like you can't quite get past that thing, that is your creative self like knocking. It's like, when are you ready to stop like critiquing a perfectly good book for not being the book you thought it was going to be?
Right.
Maybe this isn't the book you wanted to read. Maybe this is the book you want to write. And that is what happened in this case.
So is that what you always wanted to do, was to take all of the books and sort of mash them into a into a murder-based situation? Or did you know you wanted to write something Austen-y and it sort of came to you in pieces?
It evolved. I think originally I had it just set in the world of Pride and Prejudice, but by originally I mean like way, way back in the very first days when I thought of this, and it was still nothing more than a very nebulous idea. Very early on, I realized that I would want to have characters from the novels. Jonathan and Juliet sort of took shape a little bit later.
Okay.
And, and then I sort of dove in once I figured out who I wanted my culprit to be, who I thought it made sense for the culprit to be. Then it was sort of full steam ahead once I had that. But yeah, for years, the rough nebulous idea of it existed in my head, like probably a good 3 to 4 years.
Wow.
Something like that.
Some of these Simmer books.
Yeah, and the genesis of it was almost 10 years ago.
Wow.
So, it was just sort of knocking around there and then finally became a book.
I love that. So it sounds like you knew who and I'm just so you all know, I'm not going to say who the murderer was. I will not assume you've read the book yet. I assume you all have bought it and are planning to read it very quickly, but we won't.
Of course you are.
You should. It's very good. But we won't say who the murderer is. But so it sounds like you knew who it was from the beginning. Did that change at all over the course of writing?
No, I knew who I thought it would be.
I know we can't go into too many details about why you made
sense. It was the person that made sense to have done it. So, and once I was happy with that choice, there was no reason not to sort of go ahead with it. But yeah, that was probably figuring out who would do it. That was probably the thing that took it from vague amorphous idea to book-shaped object.
Yeah, because then, that's a plot then. You have that full thread and just not hanging the other motives and things around it.
Yeah, it still took a couple of years for me to realize that I would make the book-shaped object an actual book, but it did get there eventually.
Excellent. And Alice says she has 130 pages more to go. You're welcome for no spoilers. I forgot to say this earlier, but for those who are watching, if you have questions for Claudia, you can drop them in the comments and we'll do them at the end. But I keep an eye on the comments, so you can put them in when you think of them, and I'll just pull them up later.
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously had to capture the voices of these very iconic characters in writing. Did you find any of them easier to write than others in terms of like their voice and their characterizations?
Let me think.
Or anything harder to write than others as well?
Honestly, the one that's the hardest to write, not in terms of getting her voice, because I think you can get her voice easily enough, but in terms of remaining true to her voice and yet really engaging with her as a character, is Fanny Price from
that makes sense. I thought that the way that you handled her and Bertram.
Edmund Bertram.
Edmund Bertram, yes. Okay. Mansfield Park is the one I have reread the least in my life. I know that makes me very unique among Austen fans.
For a lot of us, yeah.
But like they were in particular, they're so well done and such an interesting look into characters that aren't necessarily interesting at the sort of what they're giving at their base.
Well, Fanny was very much something that was an ideal in that era.
Right.
Most of Austen's heroines were, at the time criticized for being overly pert, and
Fanny does not give us that,
etc. Fanny is what it was supposed to be, which is not what we want from a heroine now, which is somebody who's very timid, very passive, very much. She draws into herself, and taking that and not being untrue to her. Like, for instance, also, I don't think it was 95, but it was right around 95. There is a revisionist film version of Mansfield Park.
Ooh, interesting.
And the thing is, in a lot of respects, I think it's very good. It's a fair revisionist take, and it asks questions while staying true to the plot. Asks questions like, okay, it says in the book, their money comes from a plantation in the Indies,
right.
That means slavery.
Right. And yet you are the moral high ground of
right. And what does it mean for these different people? But where it falls apart is instead of portraying Fanny Price as Fanny Price, they drop in like a Jane Austen-esque person as the lead character. But the choices that are made in that book, they make sense for Fanny. They don't make sense for this independent spirited writer.
Right.
You don't know why she would make these decisions. And that really always drove me a little bit nuts, because in some other aspects, it's one of the things that really, really asks you to look against the grain, but at the same time, very much does deliver the story and looks beautiful, etc. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to replace Fanny with some creature that I think, you know, we would consider more quote unquote worthwhile as a main character. It has to be her, but we have to get her to a place where she would make choices she wouldn't usually make, where her different ideals and convictions are brought into conflict with each other, and she must take she must make a decision. So coming up with all of that, that was probably the most difficult thing.
Yeah, definitely. I will say I think her journey was my favorite of all the characters in the book, just from the beginning to the end. And like, it did stay so true to who Fanny is while still giving us so much more of the inner life than we necessarily see. Because she doesn't show it to us because she doesn't need to in Mansfield Park. That's not what she's interested in doing. Because she's not forced to have this conflict. But it's masterfully done. So
thank you.
Brava. So was there anyone who came easier, or was it more that one was challenging? Or even one that you were like, I was really excited to get into this person's head.
I have to say, the very easiest one to do, and it was a delight, very minor character, but since this is happening at Donwell Abbey, we are near Highbury and Miss Bates.
That was very fun.
Boom.
Yes.
You know, it's just like, and here we go. And it was a delight writing her chatter. You know, you always wonder, are you being witty enough for Elizabeth? Is that happening? And then, of course, Jonathan, there were other concerns as well, because he would be considered in today's society somebody who's neurodivergent.
Right.
But this is not a frame of reference they have in that era. And I thought, well, some aspects of this are very interesting. It would be very difficult for him in some ways because nobody understands this. You know, it's felt to be his own choice of certain behaviors, and some of them cannot be as easily smoothed into, you know, a much more regimented society. But then on the other hand, you know, not every neurodivergent person, but many, including Jonathan, routine and predictability is very valuable. And Regency England, you know, your days start to finish, what is going to happen. If there's a deviation, like, oh, now you go to a dance. Well, you know all the dances, you know exactly the movements people will make. You're going to get touched, but you know exactly when and for how long. You know, I was like, okay, there were some things about this that would actually be really interesting. And so I got to dig into that. I did get a sensitivity reader to work with me on that at the end. Obviously, any errors remaining are my own. But that was challenging writing, but it was enjoyable writing. It was interesting to look into that and to ask those questions about how things would be different for him.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually that's a great segue into, I know I said I was going to do the audience questions at the end, but Alice has posted a question that's very relevant to that. So I'm going to ask it now. Alice says, great work, Alice. You killed it. What was the inspiration for the two young detectives? Juliet Tilney is a great character, and young Darcy has his father's quirks, the inability to converse easily, etc. So can you talk about how we sort of came to these two, the original characters that we're working with here, Jonathan and Juliet?
Sure. With Jonathan, originally, I didn't set out to go like, I will write a neurodivergent character. My first thought was just, he's more Darcy than Darcy. Except that Eva Darcy wants to be like, relax. Can you
Which is so good. Just the idea that Darcy is someone who's like, that kid is really tightly wound.
Really uptight. But then I had to ask myself, well, what could be fueling this? And after I'd written a few chapters and I was just playing on that, and this was the rough draft of the chapters, obviously not what you're seeing now, but I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think that could be what's going on. And the minute that I understood that, I thought, oh, that's a really rich thing to get into. That would be great. Juliet came about, I mean, obviously in a lot of ways, she is very like her mother. She's a little bit more sensible than her mother, in large part because she was raised by her mother, who has become a fairly wise and knowing person, and also has become a writer, which I thought, Catherine, I think that's a completely valid way for her to go. And probably the biggest thing there was realizing that there's no way that Catherine Moreland named her kids like Mary,
Right.
John, it's like, no, Juliet and her siblings have even more
Yeah, is one of
outlandish
them
feelings.
Albion is one of them?
Her brother is Albion and her sister is Theodosia. And of course, those were names that were in circulation at that time, but they were pretty uncommon. But I think Catherine would have the flair for the dramatic, and I think Henry would indulge that.
Yeah, plus then it's just not another character named Jane, which is nice for a reader to mix
Mhm.
it up a little bit.
Yeah, I had to adopt, many things, many. I can't go into this other thing about this name because it would lead to a spoiler. So I'm sorry about that brief detour. Alice and whoever else is out there will just.
There are more people, but Alice is
Yes.
had the great, excellent question so
Yeah.
far. So in terms of like preparation, because obviously you're working with, in a way, like this very beloved like IP in Austen. Did you reread all the books in preparation, or I guess it sounds like you've read them so many times that I imagine you had to do less initial like research than some other people might coming to this.
Mostly, yes. I did go back into Emma specifically for the kinds of things that we don't notice as
Like
much.
setting details and things like
Well,
that.
like, roughly how long does it take to walk from
Mm,
Donwell Abbey to Hartfield to town? I don't think there are specific answers, but you can get a sense of that.
yeah.
Um, some details like this, sort of what does the town itself sort of look like? How much activity is there? These are the things that we sort of see in the background of the
Right.
stories, but that are sort of necessary to anchor it. I did read, just as a fan, I had already collected a lot of books about that life and time and a couple biographies of her. And one very interesting book that, I mean, I guess it started as somebody's thesis, but it's somebody literally talking about how agricultural practices and natural cycles, sort of plant life, et cetera, how very minutely observed they are in each of her
Oh,
novels.
cool.
Everything really, n- to us, it's like, oh, she's talking about trees, but
Right.
the description that she gives of the grounds of Pemberley actually reveals that Darcy was very engaged in what we would now call sustainable farming.
Oh,
That
nice. Go Darcy.
well, like but I mean, and what Austin was interested in is that he was a wise protector of this. He wasn't somebody who followed fads. He's somebody who
Right.
clearly cares for things and has thought things through. That shows up.
Yeah.
Or in Mansfield Park, one of the little things that shows that Mary Crawford just does not get where she is. She can't believe that she can't hire a wagon. And they're like, but it's haying season. And she's like, and to us, that's a little thing, but it's like, no, in that
That was
era,
a major
time,
yeah.
yeah, when the hay's coming in, that's a huge priority and it has to come in. And there are a lot of little mentions like that in a lot of the books. So
Yeah.
I had that to pull from, even have a couple cookbooks. So you have to find a lot of rose water and for floral things, which you can find, but they require a bit of digging.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating though. I love that. Especially and that plays so well into the idea of who Darcy is as a person. Like
Mhm.
that's
Yeah. Oh, and
that's
by the way, the syllabub that they talk about sometimes,
yes.
a friend made some of those. I mean, they're alcoholic. They will knock you down. Those things were served at children's parties.
What is in syllabub? Like what is
There's
what is
a
the alcohol
lemony
situation?
aspect. I've honestly forgotten because I did not myself make the syllabub, but
That's fair.
a lot. It's sort of a lemony, like there's sort of like a whipped creamy. I don't think it's
Yeah.
all whipped
Because
cream.
I've
It's
had
a sort of
syllabub,
foamy
but
coffee, and it.
I've had non-alcoholic syllabub because it was in my Felicity cookbook, which is one of the American Girl cookbooks. But
Okay,
that was
yeah.
not a boozy version.
Yeah, no, the original version was boozy and crazy boozy. It was unbelievable to me.
That's how
Uh,
you keep your kids like seen and not heard is just knocking them out with rum.
yeah, I mean, everybody must have just been lurching around all the time. I can't imagine. But anyway, so we had syllabubs. But I had a lot of these things on hand, and was either already familiar with them or could go
Mhm.
looking through them. There were still things I had to research, and luckily, it's the real world, but also time passes and there's certain things that people aren't 100% sure about.
Sure.
And sometimes you would be, reading along or I would be, I don't know why I shifted in the second there. Um, but things like somebody will very definitively say what was served at a country house for breakfast. And then somebody else will very definitively say something very, very different. And, of course, the real answer is, wouldn't it be weird if these people ate different things for breakfast based on where you are in the country and personal
maybe even an entirely different third thing?
Yeah, obviously there was going to be some variation. And, did women drive this kind of carriage? And some people would say yes, and some people would say no. So in the end, sometimes there's just disagreement. And where that was true, I just chose something that, the most useful, plausible answer. It's like, I can't say for sure that this is 100% right, but it definitely isn't 100% wrong.
Good enough.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as like, because I always say work in adaptation as well. And whenever I'm researching something, I'm like, well, I'm already technically in an alternate universe where Jane Austen hadn't written these books. So also in this alternate universe, the geography is slightly different.
I wrote the Firebird series was about dimensional travel, and I felt totally free. It's like, I'd get these edit notes. It's like, you can't get from there to there in Rome in those minutes. I'm like, not
you can here.
In that room, you can do it. And God, that was the best get out of jail free card.
That sounds so satisfying. It's like, it's dimensional travel, and you knew that when you bought the book. Sorry.
Yeah, I tried to stay within at least Austen boundaries.
Right.
Obviously, even in Jane Austen, things were a little bit more dramatically timed than in most reality. But I tried to at least hew to that.
I love it. So, as we said before, you've written many critically acclaimed and just delightful Star Wars books. So I'm curious if you found that spending a lot of time writing that IP was a useful sort of skill set as you came into like what is now the Jane Austen extended universe.
Yes. God love her, that canon hasn't changed in 200 years. I was so happy.
That's a little easier than Star Wars in terms of the amount of information out there.
Yeah, Star Wars so much, though, at least in the case of Star Wars, I can still go and ask a question. The one I'm personally proudest of was at one point I was like, it wasn't Chewbacca, but still, I needed to know. I was like, do Wookiees shed? And I get back an email that's like, we have to talk about this. So there was a meeting, and I'm so proud of that. Like somewhere a meeting was held to discuss Wookiee shedding. And the answer, by the way, is they don't shed more than humans do. They just have so much more hair that you are going to find it around. But like Chewie's not going to blow his coat or something. You're not going to.
That's good. Honestly, I wouldn't like it if you did.
Yeah, it's not going to be like big hairballs anywhere. So now you know more about the seat cushions on the Millennium Falcon than you ever wanted to know.
You're welcome, everyone.
Hans
for the Austins, stay for the Wookiee facts.
He's just not in there with a vacuum every week. You know it.
No, but you know what? I'm not in my car with a vacuum every week either. So
no, me either. You have a Wookiee on it. No, I have Peaches on it, but Peaches is much smaller than a Wookiee. Her ears go up when I say her name.
I love Peaches. Peaches is my favorite Star Wars Extended Universe character, I think. So the murder of Mr. Wickham takes place after the events of Austen's books, and you've spread them out over about 20 or so years in the timeline, which means that for all the characters, we get to see what life is like after the happily ever after and the weddings and such. So what was it like to come up with epilogues, essentially, for these iconic characters? Some of them much longer epilogues than others, of course.
Yeah, that was another thing that really made me want to write this. I mean, it is a murder mystery, but in a way, it's a mini sequel.
Yeah.
To
everything.
Yeah, to pretty much all of them. And, obviously these are all good marriages. These are all meaningful relationships. But Jane Austen was wise enough to know that people are never infallible. And while we may become more aware of our faults and may not slip up as obviously or as easily as once we did, your flaws stay with you. And so it was sort of finding the points where, the flaws or foibles in each sort of person or character that could cause issues down the line. With Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth and Darcy have been very happily married for a very long time, but we meet them when they're in a period of loss and grief. And Darcy is pulled in emotionally because we know that he does this. Has he gotten better at not doing it? Yes, but this is an extremity
Right.
that he didn't have to deal with before. And so we see him go back into this place. With persuasion, Wentworth, his pride was very, very injured by the turned down proposal, even though that had nothing to do with Anne's either love for him or faith in him. That was about what she felt like the duty she owed her family. But that's still there. And even if he's forgiven her for it, which he has, I mean, that's what persuasion is.
Right.
that doesn't mean that hurt to the pride is gone. And so if that prize money he has become endangered, if all of a sudden he hasn't taken this big step up in the world that changed everything so dramatically for him, how does he deal with that? And of course, he's projecting a little bit of that onto Anne and onto her family, probably fairly in her family.
Yeah.
But it was sort of a matter of that, like finding something that is that's there in the books that would still be a part of their characters moving forward, and what situation would bring that out.
Right.
Really, I guess the main exception to that would be Brandon and Marianne, because we already know what that is. They're newlyweds in this. So
This book takes place like 3 months after their marriage, something like that.
So this is that stage where she's still very much falling in love with him, but both of them are navigating, like, what does this mean? It's each of them had a big love before. The impact of that is still with them both. How are they able to be true intimates of the spirit in the way that Marianne would demand a marriage would be, and really that Brandon would want it to be? But life and experiences and habits have made him much more taciturn. And how exactly do you work through that?
Yeah, I love it. And they're all such unique marriages too, which makes sense because they're such unique relationships, but that their trials and tribulations stay so unique and so specific to the characters too. It's just great. It's just a great book. I really liked it.
Everybody listen to Amanda.
Just read this book. Buy 5 copies. Give 4 to your friends. Start a book club. You're welcome.
The great thing about my books is they're so giftable.
I've always said that anything is a stocking stuffer if you believe.
Yes. So, yeah, I have a friend who says any pizza is a personal pizza if you just believe.
Exactly. You get 4 friends, or get 9 friends. 1 for you. Buy 10 copies. Get a bunch of syllabub.
Yeah.
Stay in for the night. Put all your car keys in your pockets. You're not going anywhere after that syllabub, and just enjoy a murder. And then play Marrying Mr. Darcy for the rest of the night, because it is a very fun game. Yeah. And then invite me, because my husband won't play with me anymore.
My husband will play and on Marrying Mr. Darcy, and he always plays Caroline Bingley.
Ooh, nice. I like that specificity. You're like, I know what I'm about, and it's Caroline Bingley.
Yes, he loves Caroline Bingley, which is maybe a little mystifying, but there's somebody for everybody out there.
Everyone needs one character flaw, and that can be his.
No, he plays a mean Caroline. I'm telling you, like he's good at that. It's you have to be ready to play.
I love that. Whenever we do play, my husband will he ignores all of the suitors and just tries to get as many pretty points as possible, so that he's the prettiest. And you actually can win that way, it turns out. Like, that could be enough points even if you stay unmarried. You're just so pretty that you still win. And I think there's a lesson in that.
Yes.
Not a good lesson, but a lesson nevertheless.
Yes.
So this is more than just an homage to Jane Austen. Of course, it's also, as we talked about, a mystery. And this is your first mystery, yes?
Yes.
So have you always wanted to try your hand at mystery?
I've always loved mystery. I've always been a fan, particularly Agatha Christie, but some others as well. But it always seemed really, really complicated. So it's not a thing that I really thought I would turn my hand to. And then this came up, and that was probably one of the big mental blocks. It's like, are you really going to sit down and figure this out?
Right.
And wow, is it harder than I thought. And I did not think it would be easy.
You didn't think it was easy?
No. Also, like, I already very much admired Agatha Christie. I mean, I remember where I was when I read the end of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Like, I remember just being like, you know, um, but the level of admiration just went through the roof when you see how easily and effortlessly,
Mhm.
and fluidly she works in clue after clue, red herring after red herring, all together in the mix of it. She never cheats. It's
Right.
always there. So that's just amazing. And I was just like, just try to get a clue in there somewhere. Just try. Um, but I worked on it, and hopefully that is working out okay. Um, and it's also, I mean, I always say this about any book, but I think it's very, very true of mysteries in particular. I always say, for those of you who have been to see the Statue of Liberty in person, when you go, they take you under it and you can look up and there's the glass roof
Ooh.
and you look up on the inside of the Statue of Liberty. And of course, everything's in relief and there are all these columns and things on the inside that hold it together.
Right.
And I always say, like, as a writer, that's the only view of your book you ever have.
Mm.
You see it from the inside. You see where all the structure is. You see where the support is. You see all of that. And you really cannot see it
Right.
exactly from the outside in the way that a reader or hopefully your editor can.
Right.
So with a mystery, those things are just like painted neon.
Yeah, that's even more severe.
Yeah.
Peaches agrees.
Peaches agrees. Do you agree, Peaches? No.
Peaches says, I mean, I think I could have written a better mystery, but this one's good too.
Peaches' mystery would be like, why have I not been given mozzarella? Why have I not been given mozzarella again? That would be the whole series.
Where is more cheese?
Where is my cheese? Who did move that cheese?
Peaches been reading the same book since 1998.
Yeah, I can't even,
where that cheese went.
Yeah, I can't even manage if I even pronounce the name of the snack manufactured by Orville Redenbacher. Like sometimes she just goes nuts.
I'm delighted.
Just hear
Peaches
the word.
is my favorite new Jane Austen character.
Yeah.
We said that you did know who the murderer was going to be, but in what other ways did the process of writing a mystery really differ from writing your other books?
It changed the plotting and outlining a great deal. The actual writing process, not as much.
That makes sense.
Plot holes can happen in any kind of book, as I had already learned. And there was one situation here where the end of the book, my editor's like, well, how did X wind up at Y? And I was like,
oh, I was hoping you wouldn't ask that.
Well, I just hadn't realized. And that it was a solvable problem. And luckily, in that case, a fairly easily solvable problem, which is not always the way.
That's a bonus. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was 1,000 Pieces of You we were at like final little shiny edits when I was just walking around outside and all of a sudden I realized this mammoth plot hole. I was just like, oh. And luckily it was one of those things that you could solve with like a paragraph and a half.
Oh, that's the best. You're just like, okay, go back to chapter 4, put a thing there.
Yeah, it could have been bad. And I mean, literally it was one of those things where I had to drop everything and like, email the editor that minute. It's like, we have to insert like some text. And she's like, oh my God.
I'm sorry about the page numbers. This is major.
Yeah, nobody had seen it. Nobody.
That's so funny.
None of us had. Somebody would have though.
Peaches has a great face.
She does when you can see it. She's due for a face trim.
We got a brief eye to the camera moment, and it was magnetic. I felt like I was at the Met Ball just watching.
Were you at the Met Ball, Peaches? Yeah.
So not only was this mystery, of course, but it was one of your first forays outside of science fiction and fantasy. How was that shift?
Honestly, that part was great.
Yeah.
I love science fiction and fantasy, but it's kind of great to know a little bit more. See, she's wanting to get up and get it's kind of nice not to have to wrangle weird terminology or ask yourself, how are they breathing? Which, sometimes is a question you have to answer.
Yeah, the only question about that one in here was about Mr. WICKHAM, and he was not. So
he ceased.
Yeah.
He ceased to breathe during.
So easy.
Yeah. So In some ways that was nice. Honestly, the thing that I thought would be very difficult, but was instead really enjoyable, was writing not in Jane Austen voice. Nobody is that good except her. Nobody.
Yeah.
She's so witty. She's so sharp. She's so great. But to try and do something that at least had the flavor of it.
Yeah.
That felt a little bit period. I had thought that would be really tough, and instead I found it a lot of fun. That's what happens when you're the weird kid that spends study hall after study hall reading 19th century books.
It gets in there after a while.
It does. And I was like, this should not be coming as naturally as it is. It was fun to do. I mean, and still there are places where I have to catch myself and be like, ooh, is that okay? And I love the thing they have on Google now where you can search for the use of a word over time and how popular it was, which is great.
That's super helpful, yeah.
Yeah, you're like, was that around? Was that around? For instance, I found out the hard way the word motivation did not exist in the Regency era.
Devastating.
Did not exist. Motive existed.
Okay.
Motivation had not come out yet. That was rough.
That sounds like a challenging one to lose.
Yeah, it was. Whereas other things, I think at one point I had a character call somebody a blockhead, and I was like, isn't that like Charlie Brown? But I was like, actually, I think Jane Austen uses it herself, and she does, and it was an insult back then. And I actually also found out. So people say something. I guess.
Yeah.
I guess you think, okay, but that's much more modern or whatever. And not only was it around when Jane Austen was around, Chaucer used it.
Wow.
He had characters going, I guess. So that, sometimes the things you think are very modern aren't. And some things that seem like motivation. Why? How would we?
It feels like if they had motive.
We did. We had motive. We had reasons, but motivation, that was, what is it? An innovation yet to come.
That must have really ruined the career of Henry Tilney, motivational speaker, too.
Yeah, it's like, what speaker? That wouldn't go anywhere.
I would listen to Henry Tilney's motivational speeches, though. Mm-hmm. They'd be gentle but nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not the most interesting, but like pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
I'd get into it.
He's pretty funny. I mean, he's really the one case in Austen where the hero is wittier.
It's
than
true.
The heroine.
He is and he knows so much about fabrics.
He does. He's a good shopper.
He loves it. My book 2, which comes out in 2023, is a Northanger Abbey retelling. So I've been like deep in Henry and Catherine for a while.
Oh,
so
excellent.
It's nice to see them hop on the page. I'm like, Henry is very good.
And that was one that had never gotten a decent film version at all until I think it's 2007. The one.
Yeah, but that version I love. It's
that one is great.
J.J. Field is just.
He's great. Felicity
so good.
Jones is great. They got Carey Mulligan as Isabella. I mean,
he's so good. It's a great adaptation.
It's so weird to see something, like, have you seen the 80s version? It's like.
That's the only one I've seen, and I think that's probably okay.
Oh my God, the 80s version is just like, it was an era when many people were taking cocaine, let's just put it that way.
You can really feel it in the way that the Northanger is.
It was a lot. I mean, I kind of had to give them points for going for it. They're like, it's about a young girl's fantasy life, but you're like, well, okay, that is a lot. But yeah, to have it never have been done even remotely well, and then have a perfect one.
Just to crush it.
Mm-hmm.
That one, by the way, for anyone who's watching, is available for free on YouTube that PBS has put up. So if you haven't seen that Northanger Abbey, we'll finish the event, but then go watch it.
Yeah, you owe it to yourself.
Yeah, it's
really
so good. It's I love it. And plus you get some fun, like weirdly sexual scenes between Isabel and Catherine, which I think is important to have just very sexual hairbrushing. Just your young fantasy life.
They did the exact right thing. Like, it's an undercurrent.
Right.
Because that's what it is in Northanger Abbey.
Right.
It's very much present, but it's sublimated. And that's what the whole point of those stories were.
Yeah, that's what happens when you try it, but you don't do cocaine while you're doing it.
Yeah. When you're living in that really repressed society, then you get this literature that's just horrid upon horrid. But yeah, it's wonderfully done. Go watch that. You will enjoy it.
Yeah. Also, for those who haven't read Northanger Abbey, because I know it's one of the lesser known, It's so fun. It's such a delightful, deliberate spoof of the things that were popular at the time. And
but it still works.
While still being like a delightful book without just being like a mockery.
Yeah, and even if you don't get the specific joke, you get
you get the feel of what it like. It's still Jane Austen, just Jane Austen wearing a spooky hat.
Yeah,
as we all should in our times. So what did you? So we heard about that. So what did you like about doing like the historical setting in addition to setting into here? We heard a little bit about like getting to write in this Austen voice. Was writing in a historical setting like a fun extra challenge?
Yes, it was. And the thing, I mean, this is true in a lot of things, but I think very much when writing historical fiction, the problem isn't the stuff that you're aware you don't know. It's the
right.
You think you know.
It's the stuff that someone else will tell you after it's published that, in fact, you did not know.
Oh, yes. The person with that information will read your book, and they will let you know.
Yeah, and there's no way for you to meet them before the book comes out. It's simply impossible.
It was a world to research, but it was one that I'd spent enough time in because of my own reading.
Right.
That came, I feel, like reasonably easily. But yeah, it was fun to do that. And also there was a question of how much do you touch on what's going on in the real world, because Austen does so very glancingly, but again, significantly. It matters. Wickham is with the militia because Napoleon's doing what he's doing. Persuasion is very tied up in the Napoleonic Wars and their aftermath, etc. There's, what is it? Oh, Sense and Sensibility is early enough, it's sort of like, whereas I think it's Colonel Brandon's sister is in France.
Right.
During a whole lot of her writing career, nobody was taking fun trips to France.
Right.
Unless you're the Scarlet Pimpernel or something. But
God bless the Scarlet Pimpernel. Another great book people don't appreciate enough.
Yeah, it really is good. There's a great audio version you can get that's read by Adrian Lucas, who played Wickham in the 95 Pride and Prejudice.
Amazing.
He's fantastic.
That's
really
very
fun to listen to.
I love the musical. I'm a big fan of the Scarlet Pimpernel musical.
I've never seen that.
Oh my God, the music is so good. There's a video on YouTube of their Tony Award performance. It's been everyone else is watching the North Anchor Avenue movie after this. You, Claudia, can watch that. It brings me to I'll hop into an audience question. Susan Farnsworth wants to know, curious to know if you happen to see the one-man show called Being Mr. Wickham, starring Adrian Lucas. This Wickham seemed like he improved with age, not a candidate to be murdered. I didn't see that, but I'd heard about it. It was supposed to be absolutely fabulous, and sort of saw him like reflecting on his life a bit more.
I would love to see that. And I haven't seen that, but I have seen, like, for instance, Lost in Austin, which is goofy as it is, in some ways, it does dig in and go like, hey, there's a way in which Wickham's actions could make sense.
Right.
If you look at it from his point of view. So it's not like I'm locked into Wickham must be bad and evil all the time, but he certainly could have been.
Yes, and in this version, he very much should be murdered.
In this version, he was, mostly. You get a couple glimpses of slightly more human moments, and the fact that, I think there's a reference. I think there's a reference in there to the fact that Kitty, for instance, is sort of the member of the Bennet family, because she was always closer to Lydia. She has a warmer and better connection to him than anybody else in her family does. But he definitely carried a big chip on his shoulder. And could that lead him into trouble? Yes, it could.
Listen, I'm not saying anyone deserves to be murdered.
No.
But if anyone did, it could be Wickham.
Let's put it, people certainly have been murdered for less.
They certainly have.
Yeah.
So do you think, and you mentioned something to this about this to me before we started, but I'll ask the question anyway and let you reveal. Do you think you'll return to the world of Austen and to this world specifically?
Actually, yes, I know that I will, because I'm editing the sequel right now. It'll be out roughly this time next year, give or take a few weeks. I don't think I'm allowed to announce the title yet, but I think I have done.
It's not the resurrection of Mr. Wickham, is it?
It is not the resurrection.
Doesn't zombie come back? Great.
No, that's been done. We've done the zombie. That's over.
It's true.
Actually, I'll go ahead and say it's called The Late Mrs. Willoughby.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah, and in the future, like, that book is set entirely in the world of Sense and Sensibility.
Okay.
It's in that location, it's with those characters.
Okay. Do we get Juliet and Jonathan solving a crime there, or is it
I will
this
say Juliet
pre-plot?
and Jonathan are the sleuths, and
Okay.
exactly how they wind up in this location, I will leave for you to discover.
But we will get to see them, and maybe they will touch hands or something. I
Yes.
can dream.
Well, I mean, and also the whole thing with Juliet, I mean, all that happens in these books is people meet a young girl and they go, "We've dined with you 3 times. Come live with us for 2 months.
Right.
We will buy you clothing." Like, it just keeps happening. It's just a thing. So, Juliet's made a lot of acquaintances who very plausibly could invite her. I mean, a lot of friends who could invite her many places. I think I misspoke. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, there are acquaintances who could become friends. I'm not sure she leaves being friends with everyone there.
Mhm.
But good. I'm very excited. So besides that, do you want to talk a little bit about what you have coming up next? Anything else you want to plug? I know that you just had this is like the end of a string of books for you. You get
Yeah, it
you get a
is.
little time off before
Yeah, I've
you can
had,
write something else.
my last 2 Star Wars novels were in Star Wars: The High Republic, which is a publishing initiative that takes place in its own time frame about 200 years before The Phantom Menace, when the Jedi really are at their height. The Republic is everything it's supposed to be. In the prequels, we're starting to see the cracks. The High
Mhm.
Republic is before all of that. And my latest book in that, The Fallen Star, came out in January. I'm taking a brief break, very brief break from writing Star Wars books just because that was a lot.
That's a lot of Star Wars
Yeah.
just to live in that many stars and wars for so long.
Yes, so many stars, so many wars. Um, Next year, I have the 3rd book in my graphic novel series, The House of El, which is set on Krypton. It's about original characters, but Jor-El and Lara and Zod are significant supporting characters. It's sort of like,
Excellent.
why don't these people know their planet's going to blow up? Which as a kid, I couldn't fathom, and unfortunately, as an adult, I'm like, oh, starting to see it. Starting to okay. And then I will have The Late Mrs. Willoughby, and I believe that I will have 2 other novels, neither of which I am currently at liberty to discuss.
And then the next question I have written down here is, do you sleep?
I do.
Okay,
I
that's
do.
good.
And yeah, and
I'm
it's a
not
good
sure when, but I'm glad that you managed to sneak some time in during the day.
yes. It's a lot, but it's tended to be this way throughout my writing career. I have periods of time where I'm writing at a moderate to slow rate. And then all of a sudden it's sort of like, let's open up the fire hose. And then for a couple of years, a whole lot happens. And then I have to sit down for a bit. But I think you just kind of have to roll with it as it comes. And another thing that's really weird about my process is I'll go years without having one new idea,
Mm.
years. And then it's always a period of about 6 to 9 months. All of a sudden, I start having ideas right and left. And those are the things that either get worked on over the next few years
Right.
or eventually, I've turned it a few ways and I'm like, okay, that doesn't work.
Right.
Let's put that back. But I think that's starting to happen. So that's exciting.
That's fun. That sounds like a very fun period because then you don't have to write the ideas yet. You just get to have them, which is the best part of an idea.
Yes.
Everyone
Yes.
knows you don't have to do them yet.
You could just imagine what it will be like when it's
Oh,
done.
what a
And
good book it
it's
could
so great.
be.
It's so great. Yeah, it's perfect at that point. And it will never be that perfect again, but
No,
okay.
but it'll be pretty good.
Yeah.
So we do have a few more minutes, so I'm going to do a little bit of rapid fire. Austin, if anyone else has questions they want to drop down, Robin says that they especially appreciated Fanny and Elizabeth Darcy interacting to see how they see each other, which I agree was delightful.
Oh, well, thank you. That was fun to go. Like, those are the 2 heroines who are the least alike,
Yes.
and here they are living in very close quarters under very strange circumstances. So that was fun to play with.
Amazing. So I know that this is like I feel bad asking this question, but I am going to ask it. What's your favorite Austen book?
Well,
If you have one.
well, I think really if somebody says they have more fun reading one than Pride and Prejudice, they're probably lying. But there are different things, I mean, Mansfield Park is the one where she doesn't stick the landing,
Mm,
really. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a great book, but everybody sort of feels like, well, then what? Then what? You want
Yeah.
to know with that. But then I find the book fascinating for
Yeah.
that. And probably the one that I'm the most intrigued and moved by is Persuasion,
Oh,
not only
that's
because it is a much I mean, it's a much more mature story in terms of the ages of the protagonists and what they're dealing with and their experiences. But what's really remarkable, if you look at Sense and Sensibility, the first one, and then you look at Persuasion and you realize how radically her style had evolved
yeah.
over that period of time, there are sections of that book that read almost like 20th century literature.
Yeah.
In Sense and Sensibility, and really even in most of Pride and Prejudice, people might as well be disembodied.
Right.
Whereas you get such like real, like physical, almost intimacy. That moment where Wentworth comes in and it's the first time that Anne has seen him in so
Yeah.
long, and she can't look anywhere else. And like that's very, very much locked
It's very
inside of
visceral. Yeah.
right. So it kind of devastates me because, she died so young. Of course, I now think that late 40s is very young. I'm trucking into 50s here.
But yeah, when you think of like the way that she could have continued to grow.
Yeah, she should have had another 2 to 3 decades, and where she would have gone in that time, I think that might have been amazing.
Yeah. She might have murdered Mr. Wickham.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's true. And also, is there a better moment of love declaration than I am half agony, half hope?
No,
That's
no.
I love my other boys. Like he's not. I wouldn't call him my favorite Austen hero, but like that
Yeah,
moment.
you pierce my soul. It's like
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, and I'm on the ground. Like
Yeah.
that's it for me.
Uh-huh.
So do you have favorite characters? Like, do you have a favorite couple, a favorite hero, a favorite heroine?
Oh, sure. I mean, Elizabeth, who doesn't enjoy her and her
Yeah.
take on the world? I'm more sympathetic to Mary and Henry Crawford than I should be. Yeah.
They deserve a little sympathy. They did not receive any from Fanny, so they can have
They
a
do
little bit.
not, and they lack the same moral foundation as the characters that Austen focused on and loved the best, but they really are more engaging
Yeah.
than anybody else in that
There's a
book.
reason why Edmund gets so into Mary, and it's like it's not just her looks.
Yeah, and you've probably run across this, but one of the only disagreements that the Austen family could ever remember Cassandra and Jane having, they were very, very close, these sisters. But Cassandra thought that Mansfield Park should end with Fanny with Henry.
Ooh.
While Jane was writing it, and they had apparently a few lively discussions on this point. Of course, Jane stayed where she was, but I kind of would like to have seen the one that Cassandra was imagining. I kind of would have. I love Eleanor
Yeah.
Ashwood Ferrers. She's so sensible, but not sensible in that sense. The sensible, the way
Right.
we would use it
Yes,
today.
the current sensible.
But the wit is so it's so packaged and careful and precise, but
Right.
is very much there with
Yeah.
her. And I pretty much love everybody in Emma. I love Emma's dad.
Oh
I
yeah, he's a
do.
delight.
He's the best. I had some issues with this latest film adaptation of Emma, and I
Mhm.
won't get into that because we have to wrap up here in a minute. We don't have like 2 hours for me to
Right.
deliver my TED Talk.
We'll do that for the death the late Mrs. Willoughby. We'll have another event where we just talk about actually the adaptation of Emma.
Yes, but like I knew that we were running into trouble when you had the scene at the wedding and Mr. Hold on, Mr. Woodhouse. Sorry, blanked out there for a minute. Mr. Woodhouse is sitting right in front of the wedding cake, and he says nothing. And I was like, "What is this supposed to be?"
Yeah,
That man he would never be anywhere near that cake without letting everybody know that it was likely to carry you to an early grave.
Yes, there is wheat flour in that. Like, no.
Yeah, cake. It's bad for
Yeah.
them. So there was that, and then there were other points, but I love those characters a lot. I love that little town. Mrs. Elton and Mr. Elton, I mean, they're probably the ones that you have the most fun despising,
And I love when there's a brief Eltoning in
yes.
which I was delighted by. Crystal popped in the last question, so I'm gonna pull this in for our last question. Crystal wants to know, what are you reading / watching / playing, and what would you recommend at the moment? Just a very small question about what you're interacting with in your life.
Literally, like, as soon as this is over, I'm going to eat dinner, and then we cannot wait to watch the second episode of Strange New Worlds, the new Star Trek show. I could not go with the Discovery. It was not giving me that feeling that I love Star Trek 4, which, it's a much more optimistic view of things. And we've had so much, like, not only in entertainment, in the real world, like, it's been so intense and so difficult.
Right.
And we had 20 years of anti-heroes and this series is about somebody's incredible tragic downfall. And this is about their tragic downfall and etc. What character dies this week? And I was just like, I'm kind of tired of this. And then, The Good Place a couple of years ago was like, it's a great show, but it was also like, yes, like, these are characters that are really earnestly trying to do good, and they are not any less funny or less complex.
Right, like, you could just be pleasant people.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
It's fascinating. And I was like, why has Star Trek abandoned that? But now they have claimed it back.
Amazing.
And that is excellent. I'm getting my cozy mystery fix from Death in Paradise.
Excellent.
Yes, always fun. What else am I watching? I'm trying to watch Evil. It may be a little too horror-y for me. I just started dipping into it, and
it sounds like horror from the title.
Yeah, I was a Lost fan, so every time I see Michael Emerson, I'm just like,
yeah.
So I don't know if I'm going to make it with Evil. It's clearly a very well done show. Whether or not I fully dive into it. The last movie I went to see was Doctor Strange.
Oh, I saw that too.
Yeah. There were moments,
a Daenerys problem.
There were moments that were good and interesting, but
I could have just watched the new Spider-Man again and been happier.
Oh my God, yeah, that was so much better.
Yeah.
Also, it's like, you're going to pay for this cameo and that cameo and that cameo, and you can't get Paul Bettany in here for 15 seconds.
Right.
Like that would actually have
hold a picture of Paul Bettany that you have in the studio in front of the camera and move it around.
Yeah, just get a little standee in the background over there.
Yeah, I bought that cardboard cutout. They exist.
Yes. Let's see. The last good new movie I saw was Belfast, which is a rare example of a movie that is very deeply sentimental without ever being maudlin.
Ooh, that's a fine, neat little thread.
It is. It's really deeply felt and very well acted. The only quibble I had with it, his parents have financial troubles, but they're played by Jamie Dornan and Caitriona Balfe from Outlander. So it's like, have you guys considered modeling? Because
or time travel, perhaps.
But the idea, of course, is that you're looking at this world through the eyes of the little boy, and he idealizes them. And
so to him, they are the most beautiful people to ever exist, and
exactly.
Played by the most beautiful actors to ever exist.
And if you haven't seen it, the part of the grandfather, really, I thought the best acted part of it all, is played by Kieran Hines, who was, of course, Wentworth in the 95 Persuasion, and he got his one Oscar nod for that. So that's awesome.
Oh, well, I could just hang out and talk Austen and various adaptations with you forever, Claudia, but unfortunately we do need to go.
Oh, wait, I didn't even talk about books I'm reading.
Oh yes, go.
Woman Eating
a little longer.
Is excellent. I can't remember the author of it right now. Eternal Life by Dara Horn.
Ooh.
That is an unusual one that I think you will enjoy picking up. I just throw those out there and then we'll go.
What was the first one again? I didn't hear you say the title.
Woman, Eating. And I can see the name on the book jacket, but I cannot call it to mind.
Everyone just Google woman, eating after this.
Yes.
And then, but Google woman, eating one more page so you can buy it through our website.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anything else you want to toss out before we head out? Plugs, perks, etc.?
Let's see. If you happen to be in the Houston area, I'm doing an event there this Saturday, mid-afternoon. I can't remember the hour offhand. I ought to be able to.
It'll be on the website.
But if you check either my website or the one for that store, which is called Murder by the Book, you should be able to find that easily enough. If, on the other hand, you happen to be in the San Diego area, I'm doing an event at Mysterious Galaxy on, I think it's Monday the 23rd.
Excellent.
The second to last Monday in May.
I think that's the 23rd.
Yeah, it's a week from this Monday.
Okay.
So if you happen to be at those places, that would be awesome. I do have other events in person and Comic-Cons coming up all summer. So you can follow my Twitter or my Instagram, and hopefully I get to see you wherever you are.
Yes, amazing. And if you all enjoyed this, we do many other events, both virtual and in person, here at One More Page. You can check out more of them on our website. We've got a fun summer coming up. And thank you so much, Claudia. This was just an absolute delight.
This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all, and have a good night, and happy Austining.